Sit down.
That's
has like 4 or 5 of them.
Can I doll up real quick?
They're in Unit 3. They're doing question 1.
Gosh.
The weakening of the older social hierarchy and the erosion of the traditional belief in the elite rule made the rise of political parties both necessary and possible. Do you agree or disagree with this opinion recently expressed by an American scholar? What evidence can you offer to support your position? How would you distinguish between a faction and a political party, and how important is that distinction? How do political parties in a democracy differ from ideological parties, and why are those differences important? And when you are ready, you may begin.
According to political science professor E.E. Schatzschneider, political parties created democracy, and modern democracy is unthinkable save in terms of parties. The founders, however, did not believe a party system was viable, but the American belief in the power of the individual and the physical and popular growth of the country made political parties a more practical option for the election of officials because their generalized platforms overcome regionalism by providing a constant connection for people across the country with similar interests.
This belief in a more direct democracy can be seen in the continual expansion of suffrage and the advent of ballot initiatives and referendums. We agree with Gordon S. Wood that the weakening of the social hierarchy and traditional belief in elite rule led to the rise of political parties. Political parties in America grew out of the idea that government should actually represent the people. Colonial governments affirmed the place of Republican government early, with extensive voting rights, but trust was still vested in the elite, as very few of those eligible to vote did, and they usually voted for the same powerful families.
Only during the period of salutary neglect, when these families lost their authority from the crown, did the ruling elite turn to their only other viable source of authority, the people, to maintain power. The elite encouraged people to come out and vote for them, and voter turnout skyrocketed. Once these voters mobilized, it was difficult to keep them from voting for officials more representative of their communities than the detached, established elite.
These new voters naturally organized into parties as the number of voters grew and the importance of centralized ideas became more important than regional ideas, especially with the advent of federalism. The permanence of the right to have political parties was solidified with the First Amendment rights to free speech and association. Political parties are groups with a generalized platform of social and economic ideals and policies.
These platforms are broad, so the most possible voters will identify with them. The parties can become so generalized they oversimplify and become detached from individuals. Such as in the United States, where most opinions are quickly sorted into either conservative or liberal categories. Issues are rarely so cut and dry, and the solutions to problems cannot be decided on party lines, especially on the local level. This disparity between the big parties and specific problems creates a political void that third and ideological parties fill.
While large political parties have mass appeal, ideological parties are often more specific and unorthodox in their policies and ideals. The Green Party has specifically an environmental concern, and the Libertarian Party supports radically hands-off government. These parties are relatively powerless on a national level compared to the established parties, but can be very influential on a local level. Our size and federalist system create an environment where a two-party system is easy to maintain. But other democracies like England function with coalition governments, which have between 3 and 6 parties with more specific platforms.
James Madison defined a faction as a number of citizens of common interests adverse to the rights of other citizens or the aggregate interests of a community. These factions have a key weakness, being too small to see their agendas materialize or being stopped by the check and balance system. Unfortunately, it was assumed that there would be many factions instead of the two-party system of today, where powerful majorities often occur. Because these parties are in constant danger of becoming factions, the competitive power struggle between them is necessary to check their powers.
Their main purpose, then, is to hold the government accountable, as Brutus suggests the people ought to, by providing a middleman between the government and the people, and offering an alternative to the party in power. The majority party enjoys popularity followed by failure constantly. Power has shifted 29 times in the House, and blocks of voters can swing to another party, such as the black vote shift from Republican to Democrat during the Civil Rights Movement. Unlike factions, parties work for the common good. As Federalist 70 states, parties promote deliberation and circumspection, and serve to check excesses in the majority.
This ability for civil discourse and compromise among competing interests is an important distinction between factions and political parties. Other than preventing one another from becoming factions, the major parties also control smaller parties by absorbing and discrediting extremists on both sides, as when the traditionally conservative Republican Party mostly absorbed the Tea Party's powerful movement.
Though useful, political parties can be dangerous too, as George Washington warned in his farewell address. They are likely to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be able to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. Thank you. We are now open to questions.
What do you guys think is a better system for partisanship? Our system, the two-party system, or the coalition government in Great Britain?
Well, first off, Great Britain just recently went back to coalition government. From World War II until today, they had essentially had a two-party system. That said, I believe that a system with multiple parties might be better because more interests are being represented.
I disagree with Shane because Italy is a more viable example of a coalition government because they've had it for much longer than England, and you can look at their economics status right now, and it's very poor. They obviously aren't doing very well. That may not be necessarily attributed to a coalition government, but it's easy to look at their government and say that it is failing.
I think with a coalition government, the parties more represent specific interests and are more likely to be factions and just work towards that specific interest and not the common good. And I guess the coalition government kind of fulfills, especially in Italy, Madison's idea that factions, there would be so many that they wouldn't be able to take away people's rights, but I don't think it's the best option.
Why do you think that in our large two-party system, like the Republicans, Democrats, why do you think that there's so many ideological factions aligned in the same party? For instance, some social conservatives who are vehemently anti-abortion share the same political ground with certain fiscal conservatives who honestly couldn't care less about the moral issues that the social conservatives do. Why are they aligned?
Well, as we alluded to, the more generalized the party's platform is, the more voters they potentially have. So when you say conservative and you take it as both socially and economically conservative, you have all of the economically and socially conservative votes, and that's where you get that alignment between people that don't necessarily agree in a political party.
Well, for example, that are mostly speaking of the Republican Party. The Republican Party generally opposes taxes, and especially increased taxes. And that's one issue. Those types of issues are what bring political parties together. So you may have someone who's primarily focused on social issues or primarily focused on economic issues, but issues like opposition to taxes are what brings parties like the Republican Party together.
Could you repeat the very first part of your question? Because I thought at first you were asking why there are ideological parties, but then... No,
I'm asking why in our two-party system do ideological factions that don't really align, or at least at first glance don't align well with each other, why do they end up in the same party?
Well, I think a huge part of that is a small little faction won't have any weight, and since the two major political parties so much dominate the political process and maintain that power for themselves, the only way for these factions to have a voice is to join in with them.
Also, sometimes those issues can be connected to each other. Like, for example, a lot of people that are anti-abortion oppose government funding for abortions. And if the government isn't making money through taxes, they're not going to have money to pay for abortions.
Do you agree with the part of the scholar's statement that there's a weakening in elitist rule in that social hierarchy? Do you agree with that part of the statement?
Well, in his essay, when we read it, we find that he refers to a very specific section of people, the elite at the time of about 1730 to around 1780, that tapered off and allowed political parties to arise, that allowed Republican government in America to arise in general. So the statement that the elite has diminished in any way is completely false. Obviously the parties are controlled by an elite, and we have an elite in our government right now. Like Mitt Romney, he obviously isn't an average American, he's got $200 million.
The point is that political parties arose for this brief moment where the elite did disappear because they had to turn to the common people in order to reaffirm their authority, kind of. And today, of course, there is an elite, and it's the point that there was the Washington quote at the end of our testimony, that it's the political parties are the power of the people, but these people can easily take that power and forget about the people.
Going off of what my colleague said, there is still an elite today. There are people like Mitt Romney that are very wealthy, but that elite isn't necessarily in power. So the elite has to use political parties to try to gain back that power, and that's why they end up spending so much money that they do on elections. That's why the president only makes $400 a year for his salary, but people spend hundreds of millions of dollars to get elected president.
$400,000.
Did I say 400 billion?
No, you
It's
said
400.
400.
Actually, I don't know if you guys have other. Okay. Well, to kind of follow up on that, you say that there is an elite. Is there only one elite?
No, there's several different types of people who might make up that elite. There's people that are elite that identify as conservative, there's people that are elite that identify as liberal. And then there's people that are elite for different reasons. There's people that are elite because of business interests that are very wealthy. There's people that are elite because of religious interests. Churches have great influence over factions of both parties.
Going off of what he says, there's also something like an economic elite, like Mitt Romney, or you can look at our Supreme Court justices who don't need to campaign, but they are an elite because they have so much power to rule on legislature.
How has legislation, either at the state or national level, tried to rein in the power of partisanship?
One thing states have done is impose term limits, and term limits are one of the best methods to combat partisanship because they make it more likely for a change of power. Because if elected officials are termed out by the Constitution, then that makes it more likely for fresh faces to come in, and oftentimes they are from the other party.
Okay, we'll stop there. I only got one testimony on, so I didn't get this one.
Yeah, well, it was on Google Docs, but we must not have emailed it to you.
Wait, did I email you the wrong one?
You just emailed me two questions.
Okay, I don't know. Because
You only sent me one.
right,
So I was curious about that.
I meant to send this one.
Yeah, I think you only sent me one, so it's no big deal. If you have any comments and testimonies, their testimonies not radically different, but it's definitely different. So
We changed our Green Party example to
Was it the farming lobby?
communists, and then we, as an example of a faction, we mentioned the farming lobby, and your question that we seem to support that there's no elite anymore,
Yeah.
we clarify that.
Okay, sounds good. And actually, to be honest, I thought you answered that really well. You had a good background of the quote.
Yeah.
I think that's really weird.
It's more nuanced than Monday.
I
We had
I
a big
think
fight
that's
about
really
that.
interesting the way that quote's presented in the question to make it seem like it's a current,
Yeah,
it's referring to current times, but that understanding's good to bring in.
just who is he? That's what
Sorry.
Yeah, that's the only thing, yeah. One of the other questions was about where the ideological parties, how they end up in the same thing. Just the broadness of the two parties. I mean, you win at it, but I think that's the most straightforward way of saying it is they have broad scope and sometimes they'll involve these different ideas. I thought a lot of your answers were really good. I thought it was balanced. I thought you guys did a good job.
I think, yeah, I actually think you handled, actually, I ironically think that your cross-section in general was stronger on Monday, but I think it was a different set of questions, and there were some traps that I know that I threw out at you a little bit. But I think that one of the things that you'll want to do is that in answering this question, and also in us asking the questions, we assume the definition of an elite. I think, and this is not something that you would want to necessarily put in your testimony, but I would come up with a one-sentence definition of what you consider to be an elite, because an elite can mean a lot of different things. An elite could mean somebody that is there because they're part of old money, part of an old family, like a Bush or a Kennedy or a
Rockefeller.
Rockefeller, etc. Or you could say that somebody's an elite who earned it by merit. You could say that Bill Gates is an elite, but he's not really part of an elite. There are different levels of social, status, socioeconomic status. And in the context of a political elite, I think you want to identify people who have the wealth and the clout necessary to control the levers of government. That's really you want to keep that definition in your mind, and that'll help you when it comes to kind of those questions that I was throwing at you. think of the concept of exactly as you said, Shane, the dueling elites, all right? Because if you think about it, what do Republicans always accuse Democrats of being in every election? The liberal elite, okay? Democrats accuse Republicans of being the moneyed elite. They're different elites. In Democrats tend to be seen as these liberal, like, artistic elites, or like the Hollywood types, the mainstream media or the lamestream media. Right, exactly. Yeah, the northeastern liberal kind of limousine liberal, condescending. Some of the snooty people in the suburbs of DC are actually great examples of that. And then et cetera, and they're really kind of labor unions can be even seen as an elite, even though their constituency isn't exactly elite. So. And I think that's where it kind of opens up, where the elite now is not on the basis of some sort of, again, like the old social hierarchy on the basis of a landed nobility or gentry. It's all about, it's about a new elite that sort of emerged, as you said, to fill the vacuum. Because nature abhors a vacuum, so it filled the power vacuum. So I think that's just all for education purposes. I think you guys have a very, very good grasp of this, and it's a really, really good testimony, and really, really good. You guys are doing well. So
I talked to Unit 4 about British Parliament more in terms of the structure of elections and those types of things. Because the parties in Great Britain have a lot more power than our parties here. Because people don't run for office. It's proportional, right? It's all proportional, and they decide who takes those seats. So, Scooter doesn't say vote for me, it's vote for the Liberal Party, vote for the Conservative Party, and then it's like, okay, you're doing this area, this area, this area, this area, and vastly different. So I think that's stuff, and they have the social elite still in the House of Lords, but they don't have the social elite necessarily in the House of Commons. They have more of a political elite, right? So that's something in terms of that elite question you can link between the two. Because once again, these questions are going to be so comparative. I think that's where cross-ex could stem on. That is the British type of system. The question that Mr. Denny asked you guys about the nuances of parties and how they can be so different yet in the same party. In terms of just a historical example, after Goldwater gets destroyed by Johnson in 1964, the Republicans kind of step back and go, what do we need to do to become a prominent party again? And that culmination happens with Reagan. And Reagan really is this political genius who gets the social conservatives and the economic conservatives together in one ballpark and unifies them in a coalition of what becomes the Republican Party.
Reagan's Big Ten. And the Reagan Democrats, there were like a lot of working class people who voted for Ronald Reagan because some of his patriotic appeals were a little bit more appealing.
And most of them are in the Republican Party now.
Now they are. Now a lot of Reagan Democrats are Republicans.
Yeah.
Right.
So they sit back from the Goldwater defeat, going, what do we got to do? And that's how they start planting. That's how they start bringing those in. So there's an historical example.
I would say that just with the loss of when the Obama election and the Democrats swept the House and Senate.
Yeah.
And Fox News was like, we need to figure this out.
Correct. I mean, and then they go, and the National Review is that same thing in terms of press, but on a magazine level, they do the exact same thing. And that's when the National Review becomes a prominent magazine in the United States, on the conservative side. So, good. I mean, I think, anybody else have anything else want to?
Yeah, they basically hit on everything. Just brief, minor stuff, just eye contact a little bit better. I noticed you were kind of like, sometimes when you'd answer cross-section, you'd kind of drift off and you'd start looking up here. When I'm trying to focus on you, like I kind of want to know, like, what's back there, what's he looking at? And
I was looking at the left side like Nick most times.
yeah, no, I just like when he asks the question, just make sure you focus on him and like kind of drift between all of us and like get us all involved in the conversation, but make sure you're directing towards him mostly.
There's a teleprompter at each one of our.
Yeah, exactly, and just keep looking over. Other than that, really, good job, testimony, good job, process.
Does Obama really use a teleprompter?
Yeah, it's like every other.
Michelle Bachmann
president
doesn't.
in America-
She just doesn't look at the
television
camera.
Presidents.
Yeah,
but he does.
It's not on my sheet.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, Mr. Clark was ready. He's like, all right, you guys have to fight with the death for the elitist question. You did it. You battled it back.